Welcome to Dusky Lore. Close your eyes, dim the lights, and listen closely as the shadows begin to speak. Story 1. Since 2017, Christmas Eve stopped meaning the same thing to me. My wife had left 6 months earlier, and the divorce was officially finalized just before Thanksgiving. There I was, a man who had graduated from college the same year Facebook went public, spending the holidays alone in a house that, all of a sudden, seemed too big for one person. I worked as an insurance adjuster, one of those jobs where you see so much property damage and so many human tragedies that you end up thinking nothing can affect you anymore. Or at least that's what I believed. That year I turned down every invitation from family and friends, convinced that being alone would be more bearable than pretending to feel Christmas joy. My neighborhood in a Minnesota suburb looked like something out of a Christmas movie. Rows of houses covered in lights, inflatable snowmen on the lawns, and families going from house to house with plates full of cookies. The Donnelly family lived 3 doors down. Patrick and Christine, their teenage daughter Amber, and their 10-year-old son Miles. We weren't close, but we had that comfortable neighborly relationship built on greetings from the garage entrance and small conversations about the weather or lawn care. The snow started falling around 4 in the afternoon, dense and relentless. It was the kind of storm that makes you grateful to have working heat and a pantry with food. I spent almost the entire day lying on the couch watching old movies, accompanied by a bottle of bourbon that in theory was supposed to last me until New Year's. By 8 at night, the outside world had turned into a white blur, and I decided to step out onto the porch just to watch the storm swallow the streetlights. That was when I saw it. The Donnellys' front door was completely open, letting out a rectangle of warm yellow light onto the snow-covered porch. At first I thought someone had just gone out, maybe to get something from the car or check the decorations. But the minutes passed and the door stayed open, while snow began to pile up on the doormat. I remember thinking it was strange, even irresponsible, considering how expensive the heating bill would be. I waited another 5 minutes, watching, convinced Patrick would appear at any moment to close it. But no one came out. The door remained there, wide open, like an invitation or a warning. And something in my stomach told me I had to go see. I put on my boots and heavy coat, took a flashlight more out of habit than necessity, and trudged through the accumulated snow toward their house. The wind cut across my face as I crossed the distance between both homes, and by the time I reached the porch, my face was numb and ice crystals clung to my beard. I shouted before going in, "Patrick, Christine, is everything all right?" But my voice seemed to get lost in the storm roaring behind me. The answer was total silence, a stillness so heavy and wrong that it seemed to occupy physical space. I crossed the threshold, shaking the snow from my boots onto the doormat, and immediately the warmth of the house wrapped around me, along with the smell of roasted turkey and the pine needles from the Christmas tree. The living room looked like a catalog photograph. The tree was decorated with red and gold ornaments. There were gifts scattered around the base with torn wrapping paper, and stockings hung over a fireplace where the embers still glowed orange. Everything conveyed the normal scene of a festive night, except for the absolute absence of the people who should have been enjoying it. I moved farther into the house, calling their names again, my voice breaking slightly in that empty space. The dining room froze me in place. The table was fully set. I remember counting 5 places, something that seemed strange to me because there were 4 of them. In the center was a turkey that had already been carved. It still glistened, though steam no longer rose from the meat. There were mashed potatoes in a ceramic bowl, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce still holding the shape of the can it had come out of. The wine glasses were half full. One had a lipstick mark on the rim. The plates had half-eaten food on them. The forks and knives rested at odd angles, as if everyone had stood up in the middle of a bite and simply left. One chair was overturned backward, leaning sideways against the wall, and that detail closed my throat. From some speaker, very low Christmas music was playing, an instrumental version of Silent Night that, in the middle of that emptiness, sounded almost mocking. I took out my phone and called 911. my fingers clumsy from the cold, and told the operator that something was very wrong at the Donnelly house on Birchwood Lane. The first patrol car arrived in 12 minutes, though to me it felt like an entire hour while I remained alone inside that house. I didn't move from the dining room. I was afraid of touching something, of contaminating whatever it was I was seeing. 2 officers came in through the front door with their hands near their weapons, and I raised mine immediately to show I wasn't a threat. I explained who I was, where I lived, and what I had seen. They searched the house room by room while I waited in the living room. At some point, I heard one of them let out a dry curse from upstairs. Then more vehicles arrived. Unmarked cars, a crime scene van, an ambulance that remained still with its lights off. The snow kept falling, and from the window I watched the officers stretch yellow tape between the trees in the front yard, the beams of their flashlights cutting through the white darkness. A detective named Ruiz introduced himself to me. He was a heavy-set man with tired eyes, carrying a notebook that looked as if it had witnessed 1,000 terrible nights. He asked me to tell him everything again, from the exact moment I noticed the open door, and I did. My voice was steadier, but my mind was running full of questions I knew he wasn't going to answer. Detective Ruiz kept me at the scene for 3 more hours, going over my statement again and again until I could have recited it in my sleep. Close to midnight, he finally told me what they had found, or rather, what they had not found. The Donnelly family had disappeared, all 4 of them, without any clear sign of where they had gone or why. But there was blood. Not much, he said, just enough to worry them. A stain on the kitchen counter, a few drops on the basement stairs, and a trail of footprints leading out the back door toward the yard. The prints were from heavy boots, size 11 or 12, and they went about 12 meters over the snow before the storm erased them completely. There were no bodies, no signs of a struggle beyond the overturned chair, no forced entry on doors or windows. Their cars were still in the garage, a Subaru Outback and a Ford pickup, with the keys hanging on the hook beside the kitchen door. Wallets, phones, coats, everything was still inside the house. Whoever had gone out through the back door had walked into a blizzard dressed for winter, but the Donnellys apparently had vanished in the clothes they had been wearing during Christmas dinner. Ruiz asked me if I had seen anyone strange in the neighborhood lately, any stranger or vehicle I didn't recognize. I told him no, and that was the truth. Although during the following weeks I would mentally review every insignificant detail of the previous month, searching for something I might have missed. The case exploded in the local news on Christmas morning, and by the 26th it was already national news. A family of 4 missing on Christmas Eve, a festive dinner abandoned half-eaten bloody footprints leading nowhere. It was exactly the kind of story cable news channels devour. Reporters descended on Birchwood Lane like locusts, their vans lined up on both sides of the street, and satellite antennas pointed at the gray winter sky. I made the mistake of opening the door once, thinking it was another detective, and found myself facing a woman with a microphone and a cameraman who was already recording. I slammed the door shut without saying a word, but they had enough material to show my face on the evening news beside the caption, "Neighbor who discovered the scene." My phone rang nonstop with numbers I didn't recognize. Reporters, true crime podcasters, people claiming to be psychics who wanted to help. I disconnected the landline and let my cell phone die, watching the circus outside through a crack between the curtains. The Donnelly house remained dark, sealed with police tape, and I couldn't stop looking at it. I looked at that front door I had entered through, wondering what had happened in the hours before I saw it open. The surveillance video appeared 3 days after Christmas, leaked to a local station before the police could control the narrative. A neighbor located 2 houses down from the Donnellys had one of those doorbell cameras, and it had captured something that made the story even more disturbing. The recording showed a figure approaching the Donnelly house around 2 in the afternoon on Christmas Eve, hours before dinner was served, hours before I saw the door open. The person was wrapped in a dark winter coat, hood up, face hidden by a scarf and by the camera angle. They walked with determination, without hesitation, straight up the driveway to the front door. The door opened before they even knocked. Someone inside let them in voluntarily. That meant the Donnellys knew that person, or at least were expecting them. The video had no audio, only that grainy, silent image of a figure disappearing into a house from which later 4 people would disappear. The police issued a statement asking the public for help identifying the individual, but the winter clothing made it impossible. It could have been anyone, of any gender, of any age. I watched that clip dozens of times on my laptop, pausing and rewinding, trying to find something in the way they walked that sparked some recognition. It never happened, but I noticed something else the news reports did not mention. The figure was carrying a small duffel bag, the kind someone would use to go to the gym. And when they entered the house, the bag went in with them. Detective Ruiz called me in for a second interview on New Year's Day, and the tone had changed in a way that made my palms sweat. The questions were no longer about what I had seen that night. They were about me. How well did I know the Donnellys? Had I ever been inside their house before? What was my relationship with Christine? Did I have financial problems, resentments, any reason to want to hurt that family? I answered everything as calmly as possible, but I understood what was happening. I was the one who had found the scene. I was the one who had called. The divorced man spending Christmas alone with a bottle of bourbon and no alibi except his own word. In true crime stories, the person who discovers the body is always the first suspect. Ruiz did not directly accuse me of anything, but he mentioned that my footprints were inside the house, that my fingerprints had appeared on the dining room doorframe, where I had leaned while looking at that abandoned dinner. He asked if I would agree to provide a DNA sample, and I said yes immediately because I had nothing to hide. But when I left that police station, I felt eyes on me, officers looking up from their desks, a receptionist who looked away too quickly. I was no longer just a witness. I had become a person of interest, and in a case that public, that distinction can destroy a life. The harassment began subtly and then escalated into something impossible to ignore. Anonymous messages flooded my work email, accusing me of being involved and demanding that I confess what I had done to that poor family. Someone spray-painted the word murderer on my garage door in red letters almost a meter tall. When I reported it, the officer who came looked at me as if I had done it myself to gain sympathy. My employer suggested I take a leave until things calmed down, a polite way of saying my presence had become a problem. I stopped going out during the day. I scheduled my grocery trips for late at night, when the parking lots were empty. A true crime forum online devoted an entire thread to analyzing my 911 call, dissecting my words, my pauses, the slight tremble in my voice when I described the dining room table. Armchair detectives declared me guilty based on nothing more than hunches and the grainy screenshot of my face from that first news broadcast. One night I found a man parked in front of my house taking pictures of my windows. When I confronted him, he said he was a blogger working on a documentary about the case, and he bluntly asked me if I had killed the Donnellys. I told him to leave before I called the police. He laughed. He genuinely laughed, and said the police were probably just waiting to gather enough evidence to arrest me. I went back inside and sat in the dark for hours, wondering if this was what the rest of my life would look like. The break in the case came in mid-February, and it wasn't the result of brilliant detective work or a dramatic confession. A hiker found human remains in a state park about 62 miles north of our neighborhood, partially covered by snow and frozen leaves. Dental records confirmed what everyone feared. It was the Donnelly family, all 4 of them, buried together in a shallow grave. The cause of death was blunt force trauma, and investigators estimated they had been killed on Christmas Eve, probably a few hours after sitting down to that festive dinner. The news hit me like something physical, though deep down I already knew they weren't coming back. But the discovery also brought answers that finally shifted the attention away from me. DNA evidence at the burial site matched a man named Curtis Bellamy, Christine Donnelly's estranged brother, who had been discharged from a psychiatric facility in Ohio barely 3 weeks before Christmas. He had a history of violent episodes, a restraining order Christine had filed against him years earlier, and a documented obsession with what he believed was his legitimate share of their deceased parents' inheritance. The fifth place at the table then took on a terrible meaning. They had invited him, or perhaps he had invited himself, hoping to reconcile during the holidays. Whatever happened at that table ended with 4 people dead and Curtis going out through the back door into a snowstorm, carrying whatever evidence he could fit into that duffel bag. Curtis Bellamy was arrested in a Wisconsin motel 3 days after the bodies were found. He was still wearing the same winter coat from the surveillance video. He still had identification documents belonging to Patrick Donnelly. He confessed to everything a few hours after his arrest, without showing remorse, describing the murders with a clinical coldness that fortunately the newspapers did not publish. The case closed, the media moved on to the next tragedy, and Birchwood Lane slowly recovered its perfect catalog silence. But for me, nothing returned to normal. I sold my house that spring, accepted a job in another state, and started over in a city where no one knew my face or my name. Sometimes I still dream about that open door, about that rectangle of yellow light spilling onto the snow, and I wake up with my heart racing and a metallic taste in my mouth. I did the right thing that night. I asked for help when I saw something was wrong, and even so, it almost destroyed my life. The Donnellys are buried in a cemetery I have never visited. Curtis Bellamy is serving 4 consecutive life sentences in a prison I try not to think about. But what stayed with me, what I still cannot shake, is that moment of hesitation on my porch before I crossed the street. I almost didn't go. I almost convinced myself it was none of my business, that the door would close on its own, that whatever was happening inside that house had nothing to do with me. If I had turned around, if I had gone back inside, poured another glass of bourbon and minded my own business, I would have slept peacefully that night. The Donnellys would still be dead, but I would not have known. And some nights in my weakest moments, I wonder whether that ignorance would not have been a form of mercy. Story 2. My mother called on December 21st, 2017, and the first thing she said was that Uncle Ray had left specific instructions in his will. She didn't say hello, or ask how I was, or even acknowledge that we had gone almost 3 years without speaking. She only said his name, the word instructions, and then went silent on the line while waiting for my reaction. I was sitting in my cubicle at the accounting firm in Boston, staring at spreadsheets I no longer cared about, when her number appeared on the phone screen. She explained that everyone was coming back home for Christmas dinner. Everyone, she repeated, as if that word carried a terrible weight. My cousin Wade, my Aunt Francine, my Uncle Teddy, people I hadn't seen since before I graduated from high school in 2009. Uncle Ray wanted us to be together one last time, she said. Something in her voice made me grip the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white. Ray had died 3 weeks earlier, under circumstances no one wanted to explain to me over the phone, and now they were summoning me back to the family farm outside Albany, the same place I swore I would never return to. I drove through a snowstorm on the night of December 24th, while Route 9 disappeared in front of my headlights inside a white wall. The family farm was about 40 miles from the city. It was an enormous Victorian structure my great-grandfather built when he emigrated from Poland in the 1920s. 3 stories of dark wood and strange angles. A house that always seemed to be watching you, no matter which window you looked at it from. I reached the gravel driveway around 6 and counted the cars already there. My mother's old Buick, a silver truck I didn't recognize, Aunt Francine's black Mercedes, and a beat-up Jeep that had to be Wade's. My family is not the kind that hugs at the door and says they missed you. We are the kind that holds grudges for generations, the kind that remembers every offense and every perceived insult, the kind that communicates through icy silences and looks sharp enough to draw blood. Uncle Ray had been the only one who tried to keep us civilized. He called on birthdays and forced us to share the same room once a year. Now he was dead, and somehow his death had brought us together again, like gravity dragging debris toward a black hole. I sat in the car with the engine running, watching shadows move behind the yellow-lit windows, trying to remember how to breathe. My mother opened the front door before I even reached the porch steps, and the expression on her face told me everything I needed to know about how the night was going to unfold. She had aged badly in the years since the last time I saw her. Deep lines around her mouth, gray streaks running through the hair that had once been reddish, and a thinness in her body that made her look brittle. "Elliot," she said, making no attempt to hug me. She only stepped aside to let me into the foyer. "You came." The way she said it sounded more like a reproach than a greeting. The house smelled exactly as I remembered. Old wood, dust, and something underneath that I had never fully managed to identify. Something like copper or rust. I heard voices coming from the dining room, low and tense, but my mother grabbed my arm before I could move toward them. "Your uncle's death," she whispered, digging her fingers into my sleeve. "Don't mention it. Don't ask questions. Just get through dinner, and then we can talk in private." She let go of me and walked toward the kitchen without saying anything else, leaving me alone in the hallway with my suitcase and the growing feeling that I had made a serious mistake by going there. The dining room was a museum of family dysfunction frozen in time. Aunt Francine was sitting at one end of the long oak table, her jewelry catching the light from the chandelier. Her face held an expression of polite contempt. She was my father's sister, and she had never forgiven my mother for marrying him, though the reasons varied depending on whom you asked. Across from her was Uncle Teddy, Ray's younger brother, a heavy man with red eyes who was already on what looked like his third or fourth glass of whiskey. My cousin Wade was by the window. He was 23 and looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He wore his flannel shirt untucked and his beard grown out wildly. Near the fireplace was a woman I didn't recognize. She must have been in her 40s, her blonde hair pulled back tightly, and she watched everyone with the sharp attention of someone filing away details to use later. "That's Gail," Wade said when he noticed I was looking at her. "Uncle Ray's girlfriend, or whatever she was." The woman named Gail did not react. She simply kept watching, her hands folded on her lap. No one stood up to greet me. No one smiled. The tension in the room was so dense it felt like stepping into water, and I immediately understood that whatever had brought us there, it was not grief. Dinner started at 7, and during the first hour we performed the rituals of a normal family gathering while pretending we didn't hate each other. My mother brought out the turkey, the mashed potatoes, and that green bean casserole no one ever ate. Aunt Francine made superficial conversation about her vacation house in Florida. Uncle Teddy poured himself another whiskey and stared at his plate without tasting the food. Wade checked his phone under the table, bouncing his leg with nervous energy. And Gail only watched. She barely touched the food, barely spoke, but her eyes moved from face to face as if she were solving a puzzle invisible to the rest of us. I tried to ask about Uncle Ray once, just a simple question about the funeral arrangements. The whole table went silent. My mother shot me a look capable of freezing boiling water. "The funeral was private," Aunt Francine said in a dry and definitive voice. "Ray wanted it that way." I noticed she said wanted, not would have wanted, as if Ray had somehow arranged his own death. The conversation shifted to safer topics: the weather, the stock market, Wade's job at the mechanic shop. But the silence around Ray's name remained suspended over us like smoke that refused to dissipate. Close to 9, Uncle Teddy finally broke. He had been drinking nonstop since I arrived, and his face grew redder with every glass. I could see something building behind his eyes, like pressure inside a sealed container. By then, we were in the living room, spread across old sofas and armchairs, pretending to enjoy coffee and pie while snow piled up outside the windows. "I want to know," Teddy suddenly said, slurring his words. "Which one of you did it?" The room went completely still. My mother set down her coffee cup with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. "Teddy," she said, warning in her voice. "Not tonight." But Teddy was already beyond any warning. He stood, swaying a little, and pointed a thick finger at Aunt Francine. "You hated him. You hated him because he knew what you did with Dad's money after he died. You think I forgot? Francine's face turned to stone, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not guilt exactly, but fear. "Sit down, Theodore," she said. "You're making a fool of yourself." But Teddy wasn't finished. He turned that accusing finger toward Gail, toward my mother, toward Wade. "One of you killed my brother," he said, and his voice broke on the last word. What happened afterward remains blurred in my memory. Fragments of movement and shouting that I have tried to reconstruct hundreds of times since that night. Aunt Francine stood so fast her chair fell backward and crashed onto the floor. Wade moved toward his father as if he were going to hold him back, but Teddy shoved him away with surprising force. My mother was saying something, her voice high and full of panic, but I couldn't distinguish the words over the blood pounding in my ears. Then Gail spoke for the first time since dinner. Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "He's right," she said. Everyone stopped and turned toward her. She was still sitting in the same chair beside the fireplace, her hands folded and her face completely calm. "Ray didn't die of a heart attack. The coroner's report was falsified. I have a copy, and I was waiting to see which one of you would collapse first." She reached into her bag and took out a manila envelope, thick with papers. Someone in this room poisoned him slowly over several weeks. And Ray knew. He knew, and he asked me to help him find out who it was before it was too late. She looked at us one by one, and when her eyes met mine, I felt something cold settle in my chest. "That's why you are all here, not because of his will, because of his list." After that, I tried to leave. I think we all did. But when Wade went to the front door, he discovered it was locked from the outside. Not just locked, blocked. A heavy chain passed through the handles, and it had not been there when I arrived. The back door was the same. The first floor windows had been nailed shut from the outside, with new pale wood against the old frames. Someone had prepared that house as a trap, and we had all walked straight into it. "This is insane," Wade kept repeating, pulling at the front door until the hinges groaned. "This is absolute insanity." My mother had gone pale and was leaning against the hallway wall as if she might collapse. Aunt Francine had her phone in her hand, but there was no signal. I checked mine too and found the same thing. 0 bars, the little icon spinning uselessly as it searched for connection. "The storm," Teddy muttered. But I didn't believe it. The storm could have affected the cell towers, but it didn't explain the chains on the doors. It didn't explain the nails in the window frames. Someone had planned everything. Someone who knew we would all be there that night. And when I looked at my family, their frightened faces, their eyes full of suspicion, I understood that the responsible person could be standing right next to me. Gail spread the contents of the manila envelope across the dining room table, and we gathered around like mourners before a grave. There were medical files, bank statements, photographs, handwritten notes in Ray's tight handwriting. The same handwriting I remembered from the birthday cards he used to send me. The coroner's report listed cardiac arrest as the cause of death, but attached to it was a toxicology analysis that told another story. Elevated levels of digoxin, a heart medication Ray had never been prescribed. In small doses, it would have imitated the symptoms of a weakened heart. In larger doses, accumulated over weeks, it would have eventually killed him. "He started feeling sick in October," Gail said, running her finger over the dates on one of the documents. "Dizziness, nausea, confusion. His doctor couldn't find anything unusual, but Ray was a careful man. He saved samples of everything he ate and drank during the last month of his life, and had them privately analyzed." She took out another sheet. A lab report showing traces of digoxin in a bottle of whiskey, the same brand I could see at that moment on the sideboard. Someone was dosing his liquor. Someone with access to this house, to his things, to his trust. She looked up at us, and there was something almost like satisfaction in her expression. Ray narrowed the list down to 5 people. The 5 people in this room, not counting me. The accusations came quickly after that. years of buried resentment bursting out like infection from a wound. Aunt Francine attacked my mother first, her voice trembling with fury. You came every week. You brought him food. You cleaned his house. You had more access than anyone. My mother answered without hesitation. I loved Ray. I was the only one who visited him after your husband left you, and you were too embarrassed to show your face. Where were you, Francine, when he needed his family? Wade started shouting about money, about how Ray had promised to help him buy a stake in a business, and then suddenly changed his mind 2 months before dying. Uncle Teddy threw a glass against the wall, scattering whiskey and broken glass across the floor, shouting that he would kill with his own hands whoever had done this. And through all of it, Gail simply watched. Her eyes moved from one person to another, recording every reaction. I stayed silent, pressed against the wall near the door, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. These were people I had known my whole life, people who had held me when I was a baby and attended my high school graduation. The idea that one of them could be a murderer seemed impossible, but someone had locked us inside that house. Someone had poisoned that whiskey, and someone, I was beginning to understand, had specifically made sure I was there that night to witness what was about to happen. It was Wade who finally turned against me, his face twisted by a mixture of fear and accusation. Why are you here, Elliot? You haven't spoken to any of us in years. You didn't come to Thanksgiving. You didn't come to Grandma's funeral. But suddenly Uncle Ray dies and you drive through a snowstorm to show up. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Gail intervened before I could speak. Because Ray specifically asked for him, she said, pulling one last document from the envelope. This is a letter Ray wrote 2 weeks before he died. He wanted Elliot here because Elliot was the only one he trusted to be impartial. The only one with no interest in his money. No old grudges, no motive to want him dead. She handed me the letter, and I recognized Ray's handwriting immediately. The same tight letters from all those birthday cards, only now shakier, weaker. The letter explained everything. Ray knew he was dying. He knew someone in the family was responsible, and he wanted me to discover who, because I was the only one who had stayed away long enough to see clearly. You are my witness, Elliot, the letter said. You are the one who can look at this family without all its history clouding your eyes. Find the truth. Make them answer for what they did to me. My hands trembled as I read those words, and I finally understood why my mother's voice had sounded so strange on the phone. She knew. They all knew. Ray was setting a trap, and I was the bait. The confrontation that followed lasted until almost midnight, and by the time it ended, the truth had come out in pieces. Ugly, jagged pieces capable of cutting everyone who touched them. It was Aunt Francine, but she did not act alone. My mother helped her. The two of them worked together despite decades of hatred, because they shared something in common: desperation. Francine had embezzled almost $200,000 from my grandfather's estate after his death, money Ray had discovered and threatened to expose. My mother had helped her hide it, receiving a share in exchange for her silence, using that money to pay debts she had never confessed to anyone. When Ray started asking questions, reviewing bank records, and making calls, they panicked. The digoxin was Francine's idea. She had a prescription for her own heart condition, and she knew how to make it look like a natural death. My mother provided the access. She visited Ray every week, brought him groceries, and replaced his whiskey bottles with the ones Francine prepared with poison. They thought no one would ever find out. They thought Ray would simply fade away quietly like an old man with a weak heart. But Ray had been smarter than they were, more careful, and even from the grave he had found a way to force them to face what they had done. Gail had called the police before any of us arrived. That was the final piece of Ray's plan. She had contacted the state police that same morning, given them copies of all the evidence, and told them exactly when and where to find us. The chains on the doors and the nails in the windows were also part of the plan Gail had prepared before we arrived. She had placed them with outside help before dinner, as a way to make sure no one could flee before the truth came out. The officers arrived around 1 in the morning, their cars cutting through the snow with blue and red lights flashing against the white mounds. I watched from the living room window as they cut the chains, entered the house, and read my mother and Aunt Francine their rights. My mother did not look at me as they took her out. She kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, her face empty, as if something inside her had finally broken. Francine cried with ugly, violent sobs that shook her whole body, but I couldn't feel sorry for her. I could not stop thinking about Uncle Ray, about those birthday cards he sent me every year, even though I never returned his calls, about how he died slowly over weeks, knowing the people killing him were the same people who were supposedly meant to love him. He deserved better than this family. Much better. I returned to Boston 2 days later, after giving my statement to the police and watching the house be sealed as a crime scene. Wade and I shared a meal at a diner by the highway before I left. Neither of us said much. We were both trying to process what our family had become. Uncle Teddy checked himself into a center to treat his alcoholism. The shock of everything finally pushed him to admit he needed help. Gail disappeared after the arrests, and I never knew what became of her or what her relationship with Ray had really been. Maybe she loved him. Maybe she was just someone he hired to execute his final plan. I don't know, and at this point I'm not sure it matters. My mother is serving a 12-year sentence for conspiracy to commit murder. Aunt Francine received 15. I have not visited either of them, and I don't think I ever will. Sometimes I take out the letter Ray wrote me, the one asking me to be his witness, and read it again just to remind myself that someone in my family once believed I deserved trust. That Christmas was 7 years ago, and I still can't hear carols on the radio without feeling nauseous. But I found the truth just as Ray asked me to. At least I gave him that. I gave him justice, though in the process I lost everything else. Story 3. My cubicle on the 5th floor looked the same as any other desk in our Philadelphia marketing firm that December. Cheap garlands taped to the divider walls, a sad little artificial tree someone had bought at a dollar store, and candy canes no one wanted stuck in a bowl. I had turned 26 barely a month earlier, and I was still getting used to feeling like a real adult. With a stable job and a one-bedroom apartment in Fishtown that I shared with my cat, Gus. A gray tabby with a critical stare who watched me as if I disappointed him every day. My routine was painfully predictable in the best possible way. I took the train downtown, spent 8 hours editing promotional copy, took the train home, fed Gus, and browsed Netflix until I fell asleep. I barely existed on the internet. Maybe one Instagram story a week, some random tweet complaining about SEPTA delays. I liked being anonymous, being just another face in a city of millions where no one pays too much attention to anyone. That comfortable invisibility was something I valued without even realizing it. I had no reason to think anyone was watching me, much less that someone was following my movements, memorizing my habits, and studying me as if I were something that needed to be deciphered. The first package appeared on my desk on December 18th, 2023, and shattered every assumption I had about being invisible. It was waiting for me after lunch, placed right beside my keyboard, as if someone had set it there carefully. Emerald green wrapping paper, a gold satin ribbon tied in a perfect bow, the kind of wrapping that requires effort that someone spends time on. A small tag read, "For Natalie," written in neat, almost calligraphic handwriting. I asked Denise, the coworker in the cubicle next to mine, if she had seen who left it, but she had been in a meeting all morning. I thought it might be a gift from some vendor, maybe someone trying to be kind before the holidays. The wrapping was too pretty to tear, so I carefully slid my finger under the seams and opened the box. Inside was a burgundy cashmere scarf, extremely soft, obviously expensive. For about 3 seconds, I thought it was a lovely gesture from someone. Then I recognized it. Not a similar scarf. That exact scarf. The same brand, the same deep wine shade, the same delicate fringe pattern at the ends. I had worn an identical one that very morning during my commute, taken it off when I reached the warm office and put it in my bag. I rummaged through my purse with slightly unsteady hands and pulled out my scarf. I held them side by side. They were the same. I sat there for a full minute trying to convince myself it was a popular item, a coincidence, nothing to be afraid of. I put both scarves in my desk drawer and went back to work. I wish I had listened to that knot beginning to form in my chest instead of ignoring it. The second package arrived 2 days later, on December 20th. The same beautiful wrapping, the same careful handwriting on the tag. This time I didn't open it at my desk. I took it to the break room, where no one was there, and sat at the corner table with my coffee cooling beside me. Inside the box was a bottle of perfume, Chloe Nomad, exactly the same one I had tried at Sephora 3 weeks earlier, on an ordinary Saturday. I remember that day clearly because I had posted an Instagram story about it. A quick video of me spraying it on my wrist with some silly text like, "Should I buy it or not?" I never bought it. It was too expensive for my budget, and the story disappeared after 24 hours like all the others. But someone had seen it. They had remembered it. They had gone to buy a full bottle just to give it to me anonymously. My mind began racing through possibilities. A coworker who followed me on social media. Maybe someone from college I had forgotten. An old acquaintance acting strangely but harmlessly. I desperately wanted there to be a normal explanation. I checked my Instagram followers, scrolling through the list of 200 and something people, but no one seemed suspicious to me. They all looked familiar enough. Friends of friends, people from high school, a few random accounts I must have accepted without thinking. That afternoon I went to building security, feeling a little embarrassed as if I were overreacting. The front desk guard was an older man named Vince, who always greeted everyone in the morning. I showed him the gifts, explained the situation, and watched his face shift from concern to something closer to amusement. He said it looked like a secret admirer, probably someone in the building who had a crush on me but was too shy to say it directly. He told me that, if I thought about it, it was even kind of sweet. I wanted to argue. I wanted to explain that something sweet would have been leaving a card or inviting me for coffee, not replicating my exact belongings and tracking my social media. But I felt stupid, as if maybe I was being paranoid and dramatic. Vince said he would keep an eye out, that he would check the visitor logs and see whether anyone unfamiliar had been going up to our floor. He wrote my name and extension in a little notebook and promised to call me if he noticed anything strange. I thanked him and returned to my desk feeling worse, not better. There is something especially isolating about being afraid and having someone tell you there is nothing to fear. It makes you doubt your own instincts. It makes you wonder whether you are the crazy one. I spent the rest of the day looking differently at every man in the office, studying their faces when they passed by my cubicle, searching for any sign that one of them was looking back at me. December 22nd was the day everything went from unsettling to terrifying. The third package was larger than the previous ones, flat and rectangular, like a picture frame. Same green paper, same gold ribbon, same elegant tag with my name. This time I took it to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a sheet of paper, the kind children use in elementary school, thick and lightly textured. On it was a drawing made with crayons, clearly done by a child because of the uncertain lines and simple shapes. But what the drawing showed forced me to hold onto the stall wall so I wouldn't fall. It was a floor plan of my apartment, not a vague approximation. An exact layout marking the front door, the living room, the kitchen to the left, the bathroom, and my bedroom at the back. Whoever drew it knew where my sofa was, where my small dining table was located, and even the window beside my bed. Red arrows pointed to different spots, with labels written in adult handwriting, neat and precise. Front door only deadbolted entrance. Fire escape unlocked window beside bedroom. Back entrance too easy, near the small kitchen door that led to the building's shared hallway. I read those words again and again, my brain refusing to process what they meant. Someone had been inside my apartment. Someone had studied how to get in, and they had made a child draw it as if it were some kind of sick project. I called in sick the next day, December 23rd, and went straight to the police station near my apartment. The officer who took my report was named Colleen, a woman about my age, and at least she seemed to take me seriously. I showed her the gifts, explained the timeline, and handed her the drawing with the arrows and labels. She examined everything carefully and asked me questions about ex-boyfriends, people I had recently rejected, neighbors who behaved strangely. I had nothing useful to give her. My last relationship had ended more than a year earlier and had been mutual, without drama. I barely knew my neighbors beyond polite greetings in the hallway. Colleen said they would file a report and increase patrols around my block, but that without a direct threat or a suspect, there wasn't much more they could do. She suggested I change the locks, maybe stay with a friend for a few days, keep my phone charged and nearby at all times. I asked her about the drawing, about the fact that someone had clearly been inside my home. She said maybe it could have been made by looking through the windows or even studying the building layout from public records. She was trying to reassure me, but there was something in her eyes that told me she was unsettled too. Before I left, she gave me her card and told me to call immediately if anything else happened. I appreciated her kindness, but I left the station feeling completely alone, as if I were fighting something invisible that no one else could see or touch. I spent the rest of December 23rd making my apartment as secure as possible. I called a locksmith who charged me almost $300 to install new deadbolts on both doors and add a chain to the front entrance. I bought a cheap security camera online with same-day delivery and set it up in the living room pointing toward the front door. I checked all the windows, locked them, and even wedged wooden rods into the tracks so they could not be forced open from outside. I pushed my heavy bookcase against the kitchen door that led to the shared hallway, the same one the drawing had labeled as too easy. Gus watched me move furniture as if I had lost my mind, meowing in confusion at the chaos. My mom called that night to confirm Christmas plans, and I lied to her. I told her I felt sick and maybe wouldn't be able to drive to her house in Lancaster. I couldn't explain any of this to her without causing panic, and a part of me still hoped it would simply stop, that whoever was doing this would get bored and move on. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the old building made me sit up in bed, my heart pounding hard, staring at my bedroom door. I kept my phone on the pillow, with Colleen's number saved and 911 ready to dial. The hours moved slowly, like something heavy dragging itself across the floor. Christmas Eve morning arrived gray and cold, with the sky threatening snow, just as the forecast had been announcing all week. I made coffee and sat on the sofa with Gus curled beside me, watching the security camera feed on my phone, even though I was right there, in the same room it was recording. Nothing had happened during the night. The new locks were still intact, the windows still closed, the bookcase still blocking the back door. For a few hours, I allowed myself to believe that maybe the locksmith and the police report had been enough, that whoever it was had understood I was taking it seriously and had decided to back off. I even texted my mom saying I felt better and would try to come to dinner the next day. Around noon, I showered, the first time in days that I relaxed, letting the hot water loosen some of the tension accumulated in my shoulders and neck. I remember thinking I would be fine, that the worst had probably already passed. I dried myself, put on comfortable clothes, and walked back to the living room, ready to spend a quiet day watching Christmas movies and pretending everything was normal. Then I saw it. On my coffee table, right beside the mug I had left there an hour earlier, there was a gift wrapped in emerald green paper, with a gold ribbon tied in a perfect bow. I did not scream. I did not run. I simply stood in the hallway, my wet hair dripping onto my shoulders, staring at that box as if it would explode if I moved. My legs felt as if they belonged to someone else as I slowly advanced toward the table. My eyes scanned the room for any sign that could explain how it was possible. The front door was still locked. The chain was on. I checked the windows without touching them. They were all sealed, with the rod still wedged in the tracks. The bookcase was exactly where I had pushed it against the kitchen door. I took my phone and opened the security camera recording, rewinding the last hour with trembling fingers. Nothing. The camera showed my empty living room, Gus asleep on the sofa, no movement until I appeared on screen coming out of the bathroom. But the gift was there. It was right there on my table, in a spot the camera should have captured perfectly. And the video showed no one placing it there. I watched it 3 times, 4 times. I looked for a glitch, a jump, anything that could explain how a package materialized inside my locked apartment without being recorded. The timestamp ran continuously, without interruption. I felt like I was losing control of reality, as if the rules of the world had stopped applying to my life. I should have called the police at that very moment. I should have grabbed Gus, walked out the door, and never looked back. But something drew me toward that box. A horrible need to know what was inside after everything that had happened. I sat on the sofa and placed the gift on my lap, my whole body vibrating with fear. The paper had the same texture as the others, smooth and expensive. I untied the ribbon and tore the wrapping, no longer caring about doing it carefully. Inside was a white cardboard box, and inside that, tissue paper folded neatly around something solid. I pulled the paper aside and felt my entire chest close up when I recognized what I was looking at. It was a knife from my own kitchen. The large chef's knife I used to chop vegetables, the one that was supposed to be in the block on the counter. I looked toward the kitchen and saw the empty space where it should have been. Whoever had been in my apartment had taken my own knife, wrapped it like a Christmas gift, and left it for me to find. Beneath the blade was a small card made of the same creamy paper and the same elegant handwriting as all the previous tags. I pulled it out and read the words written in perfect calligraphy. I chose the perfect gift. I only needed to test how close I could get. I called 911 and 2 officers arrived in 15 minutes. They searched my entire apartment, checked roof access, questioned the neighbors, and examined every possible entry point. Nothing had been forced, nothing broken. There were no signs of tampering on the locks I had just paid to install. One of the officers, a man named Danny, who looked almost as disturbed as I was, suggested maybe someone had an old key and had made a copy. But I had watched the locksmith install completely new hardware, not just rekey the old locks. The frames were intact. The windows had not been opened. They took the knife and the note as evidence, searched for fingerprints on the box and the wrapping paper, and told me they would be in touch. Colleen appeared about an hour later. She was off duty, but she had heard the radio call and was worried. She helped me pack a bag and drove me herself to my mother's house in Lancaster, because she didn't want me taking the train alone. I spent Christmas Day startling at every sound, unable to eat, unable to explain to my confused mother why I looked like I hadn't slept in a week. I told her there had been a break-in and that I was very shaken. She did not press for details, and I was grateful for it. Gus stayed on my lap all day, sensing something was wrong, refusing to leave my side. The investigation went nowhere. They found no fingerprints on anything except mine. No suspicious footage appeared from nearby businesses or traffic cameras. No witness saw anyone enter or leave my building. The police interviewed everyone in my office, everyone in my apartment complex, and even tracked down some of my Instagram followers who lived in the Philadelphia area. Nothing. Whoever did this knew exactly how to avoid being seen, how to move through my life without leaving a trace. I never went back to that apartment. I hired movers to pack my things while I stayed in Lancaster with my mother. Eventually, I found a new place on the other side of the city, with a doorman and security cameras in every hallway. Almost a year has passed and nothing has happened again. No more gifts, no more notes, no sign that anyone is watching me. But I still check the locks 4 times before sleeping. I still look at every stranger on the train wondering if they know things about me they shouldn't know. I never discovered who it was or why they chose me or what they were testing. That last part is what haunts me most. That word, test, as if I had been the first phase of something bigger, as if they were practicing before moving on to whatever would come next. Sometimes I wonder if they found another person to watch. someone who still doesn't know that their invisibility is nothing more than an illusion. And sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if they ever really stopped watching me. Story 4. My brother Craig and I had spent years promising each other that one day we would fix what time and distance had destroyed between us. After graduating in 2009, our lives went in different directions through jobs, failed relationships, and the kind of silence that grows between siblings when they forget how to talk to each other. Finally, we made a real commitment. December 2024 was going to be our new beginning. Our parents were gone. Dad died of a stroke while I was still finishing my studies. Mom passed away 4 years later from pneumonia that took her faster than any of us expected. Craig was the only family I had left. That morning I was in my kitchen in Cedar Falls, Iowa, putting cinnamon rolls into the oven while my phone rested propped against the coffee maker, waiting for the message that would tell me he had already left Minneapolis. He was supposed to arrive at noon. At 1, I thought maybe he had stopped for coffee. At 3, I assumed there was traffic or maybe a flat tire. At 6, when darkness had already swallowed the Iowa plains and the cinnamon rolls sat cold and untouched, I knew deep down that something had gone terribly wrong. Craig was not the kind of person who disappeared. Craig called if he was going to be 5 minutes late. That was how he was. I called the police around 7:30, standing by the window, watching snow fall in thick curtains over the empty street. The operator who answered sounded as if she had already taken dozens of similar calls that week. Her voice was flat, automatic, as she asked me his name, age, and vehicle description. I gave her everything. Craig Weston, 41 years old, driving a dark blue Subaru Outback with the Minnesota plates. Then I waited for her to tell me what to do. Instead, she explained that adults disappear during the holidays all the time, that some people change their minds about family gatherings, that sometimes they simply need a break. I wanted to scream at her that Craig did not need a break, that Craig had driven 4 hours precisely because he wanted to be there with me. But my voice came out steady, calm in a way that surprised even me. She told me to wait 48 hours before filing an official report. Standard procedure. Then she wished me a Merry Christmas and hung up. I stood there in the darkness, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dead call tone while the Christmas tree lights blinked against the wall in absurdly cheerful colors. I did not sleep that night. I sat on the sofa and called his number every 15 minutes until my phone battery dropped to a single digit. Every time it went to voicemail, with his familiar voice asking me to leave a message. The package arrived on December 27th, 2 days after Christmas, left at my door by a mail carrier who had no idea what he was delivering. At first, I almost didn't notice it. It was a brown padded envelope with no return address. My name and address printed in neat block letters, as if from a common office printer. I took it inside and placed it on the kitchen counter, thinking it would be a late Christmas gift from some distant relative, or maybe something Craig had bought for me before disappearing. When I opened it and dumped the contents onto the counter, my legs almost gave out. First, his wallet fell out, the brown leather one I had given him 3 birthdays earlier, softened around the edges from years of carrying it in his back pocket. Then his watch fell out, a silver Seiko with a scratched face that had belonged to our father. And finally, a single sheet of paper. It was a grainy black and white photograph printed on ordinary paper, clearly showing his Subaru stopped on the shoulder of a dark road, the headlights still on. In one corner appeared the date and time, December 24th, 2024, 2:14 a.m. I called the police again. This time they listened. 2 officers arrived at my house in less than an hour, a man and a woman who introduced themselves as Detective Ruiz and Detective Ames. The way their faces changed when I showed them the contents of that envelope told me everything I needed to know. This was not a man who had decided to skip Christmas with his sister. This was something else entirely. Detective Ruiz, a heavy-set man with gray at his temples and deep lines around his mouth, asked me to tell him everything from the beginning while his partner photographed the wallet, the watch, and the printed image. He asked if Craig had enemies, debts, any reason someone would want to hurt him. I shook my head at every question because Craig was the most boring person I knew, in the best possible sense. He worked as an accountant, paid his taxes early, and called our mother every Sunday until the day she died. Craig had no enemies. He had a small apartment in Minneapolis, a cat named Oliver, and a standing reservation every Friday night at the same Thai restaurant. Detective Ames lifted the photograph with gloved fingers and studied it closely. She frowned as she examined the timestamp. She asked if I recognized the road. I told her no, but something in her expression made me think she did. 3 days later, Detective Ames called me at 6 in the morning and asked if I could come to the station. Her voice sounded different, tense, careful, as if she were choosing every word deliberately. When I arrived, she took me to a small conference room where they had placed a corkboard against the wall. It was covered in photographs, maps, and red lines connecting points I still did not understand. She sat me down and told me the road in the photograph was a rural stretch of Route 63, about 40 miles south of Rochester, Minnesota. A lonely corridor of farms and woods that Craig would have taken as a shortcut to avoid holiday traffic on the interstate. Then she told me something that made the room seem to spin. Over the last 10 years, 4 other people had disappeared on that same stretch of road, all on Christmas Eve, all traveling alone. A sales representative from Duluth in 2018, a nursing student from Eau Claire in 2015, a retired teacher from Sioux Falls in 2016, a truck driver from Fargo in 2017. All had disappeared without a trace. Their vehicles were found abandoned on the shoulder, with signs of sudden braking, the keys still in the ignition, personal belongings left behind, no evidence of where they had gone or why they had stopped in the first place. I sat there looking at that board, looking at the faces of 4 strangers who had driven down the same road as my brother, on the same night as my brother. I felt something cold settle inside my chest. Detective Ames explained that the cases had never been connected before because they crossed several jurisdictions, different counties, different states, different law enforcement agencies that had treated each disappearance as an isolated event. A man decides to abandon his life on Christmas Eve, starts over somewhere else. It happens more often than people think. But now, with the package that had arrived at my door, everything had changed. Whoever had taken Craig wanted me to know, wanted someone to know. The photograph, the wallet, the watch. It was not a ransom demand or a taunt. It was a signature. Detective Ames looked at me with an expression I will never forget. A mixture of professional distance and something that looked almost like fear. She told me they had contacted the FBI. This was no longer a missing person case. It was an investigation into serial abductions. And my brother was the 5th known victim of someone who had been hunting on that road for almost a decade, choosing people alone and vulnerable on the one night of the year when no one would notice their absence until it was too late. They found Craig's Subaru on January 2nd. It was hidden among a group of trees about 600 feet from the road, down a dirt track that led to an abandoned grain elevator. I was not there when they discovered it, but Detective Ames called me less than an hour later. I could hear the tension in her voice as she described what they had found. The driver's door was open. The interior light had died long ago from draining the battery. There were deep scratches on the dashboard, as if something or someone had scraped the plastic with enough force to leave marks. The driver's seat was pushed all the way back, as if Craig had tried to put distance between himself and something in front of him. And on the passenger seat, placed almost carefully, was his cell phone. The screen was shattered into a spiderweb of cracks, but it was still intact. When the forensic team managed to turn it on, they discovered that the last thing Craig had done before whatever happened to him was open the camera app. He had taken a photograph at 2:16 a.m. on Christmas Eve. 2 minutes after the road camera captured his car stopped on the shoulder. The image was blurry, taken in the darkness with the flash on, but a silhouette could be distinguished standing at the edge of the headlight beams. A figure dressed in dark clothing, tall and thin, with one arm raised as if signaling him to stop. The FBI released that photograph to the media 3 days later, and in less than 48 hours, my brother's disappearance became national news. I remember sitting in my living room watching a CNN anchor talk about the Christmas Eve highway abductions. That was what they were calling them now, a name that would end up printed for years on magazine covers and documentary thumbnails, while a photo of Craig smiled from one corner of the screen. They showed the blurry figure from his phone. They enhanced it and experts analyzed it, agreeing that it appeared to be a man around 6 feet tall, wearing a heavy coat and some kind of hat or hood. Tip lines fluttered with calls. Amateur detectives on Reddit began mapping the previous disappearances, drawing circles and calculating distances, creating theories about hunting grounds and cooling-off periods. My phone rang non-stop. Reporters wanting interviews, true crime podcasters asking for exclusive access, distant relatives I had not spoken to in years, suddenly desperate to reconnect. I stopped answering. I disconnected the landline and let my cell phone send everything to voicemail. I sat in the dark with the curtains closed, watching the news cycle chew up my brother's life as if it were content, as if it were entertainment, as if Craig had not been a real person who took a dark road to spend Christmas with his sister and never arrived. The break in the case came on January 15th from the most unexpected place. A woman named Beverly Tate, 67 years old, lived on a farm about 3 miles from where Craig's Subaru had been found. She had been watching the news coverage like everyone else, and something about the blurry photograph taken by Craig's phone had been bothering her for days, until she finally understood why it seemed familiar. She called the FBI tip line and said she had seen that same figure several times over the years. Always in December, always late at night, walking along the shoulder of Route 63 with a gas can in his hand. She had assumed he was a stranded driver. She had even thought about stopping to help once or twice, but something about the way he moved had always made her keep driving. He walked too slowly, she said, as if he were waiting for something, as if he wanted to be seen. The FBI showed her a series of photographs, and she identified a man named Roy Clement Sutter, 54 years old, former long-haul trucker who had lost his commercial license in 2012 after a series of traffic violations. He lived on disability checks in a rented cabin about 12 miles from the stretch of road where the 5 victims had disappeared. When they raided Roy Sutter's cabin on January 17th, they found a nightmare. I was not supposed to know the details. Detective Ames tried to protect me from the worst of it. But information leaks when a case becomes that big. And over time, I learned what they had found inside that small wooden structure at the end of a dirt road, surrounded only by frozen fields and silence. He kept trophies, wallets, watches, jewelry, photographs, driver's licenses. One object from each of his victims, stored in labeled boxes on a shelf in his bedroom, like a collection. Craig's wedding ring was there, the gold band he kept wearing even after his divorce 3 years earlier, because he said it reminded him that he had once been loved. They also found journals, decades of handwritten entries detailing what Roy Sutter called his Christmas tradition, his annual gift to himself. He had been doing it much longer than anyone had imagined. The 5 victims they knew about were only the ones from the last decade. There were references to others, names and dates going back to the late 90s. People who had disappeared on Christmas Eve on rural roads across 3 states and whose disappearances had never been linked to anything. Roy Sutter killed himself before they could arrest him. The FBI had surrounded his cabin. Negotiators were speaking through a megaphone, asking him to come out peacefully. He placed a shotgun under his chin and pulled the trigger while they were still reading him his rights over the loudspeaker. I found out through a breaking news alert on my phone, sitting alone in my kitchen at 2 in the morning, because sleep had become something that happened to other people. I did not feel relief. I did not feel closure. I felt a rage so deep and complete that I could not move for almost an hour. I just sat there with the phone in my lap while the screen went dark. He had taken the easy way out. He had escaped trial, testimony, a life in a cell where he would have had to face what he had done every day. And worse, he took the answers with him. His journals mentioned places, burial sites, areas where he had left his victims after he was finished with them. But the entries were written in a kind of personal shorthand that investigators were still trying to decipher. They found the remains of 2 people in an underground cellar beneath his cabin. Neither was Craig. The others, including my brother, were still somewhere in the frozen Minnesota countryside, hidden in places only Roy Sutter had known. They recovered Craig's body in March. After the snow melted, a farmer noticed disturbed soil at the edge of his property, about 8 miles from Sutter's cabin. I identified him by the scar on his left forearm, the one he got when we were children, and he fell through a glass coffee table trying to catch me during a game of tag. The medical examiner said he died from blunt force trauma to the head, probably a few hours after his abduction. That meant he did not suffer for long. I don't know if that is supposed to make me feel better. I buried him beside our parents in the cemetery outside Cedar Falls on a gray afternoon in early April, when the trees were barely beginning to bud and the world kept moving forward the way it always does. The case is technically still open. They have already identified 11 victims in total across nearly 3 decades, and there may be more they will never find. Sometimes I receive calls from reporters working on retrospectives, from documentary filmmakers who want to interview the sister of victim number 5, from true crime writers who think my grief would make an attractive chapter in their books. I say no to all of them. Craig was not a chapter. Craig was my brother, the only family I had left, and he died alone on an icy road on Christmas Eve because he wanted to spend the holidays with me. I think about that every day. I think about him stopping because he saw what looked like a stranded driver with a gas can, because Craig was exactly that kind of person, someone who stopped to help. And I think about Roy Sutter standing in the darkness, waiting, knowing that sooner or later someone like my brother would appear, someone kind, someone alone, someone whose absence would not be noticed until it was already too late. Story 5. Cedar Falls is one of those tiny towns you drive through without paying much attention. The kind of place with a single traffic light and a diner that probably hasn't changed its menu since the 80s. A coworker had been telling me for weeks about its annual Christmas festival. She told me how they closed the main street and turned it into a kind of winter paradise with wooden stalls, carolers, and enough hot chocolate to drown in. My boyfriend was visiting his parents that weekend, and I had nothing planned, so I thought, why not? It was early December, a Saturday, and the drive from my apartment took about 40 minutes along winding rural roads lined with bare trees and old farms. I graduated the same year the economy collapsed, spent years jumping from one job to another, and only recently had I started to feel that my life was finally taking a stable direction. A solo outing to a small-town festival seemed exactly like the kind of simple, quiet day I deserved. I parked 2 blocks from the main square because all the closer spots were taken. As soon as I got out of the car, I heard Christmas music coming from speakers mounted on the lampposts. The first few hours were exactly what I needed. I walked among the stalls, bought a handmade ornament for my mom, and ordered one of those giant soft pretzels with cheese sauce. There were families everywhere. Children running, couples holding hands, elderly people sitting on benches watching the singers perform near the gazebo. Something I noticed fairly quickly was the number of Santas walking around. Not just one Santa sitting in a chair for photos, but maybe 6 or 7 spread throughout the festival. They all wore slightly different versions of the red suit. Some had real beards, others clearly fake ones. And all of them carried small baskets with candy canes, handing them out to children and posing for pictures. At first I thought it was a cute idea, a whole army of Santas roaming the festival. I even took a photo of 2 of them standing together near the hot chocolate stand and sent it to my boyfriend with a laughing emoji. I had no idea that one of those men dressed in red would turn the rest of my day into something that still gives me nightmares. It happened around 3 in the afternoon. I was near a stall selling hand-carved wooden angels, trying to decide whether to buy one for my sister, when I felt someone stand directly behind me. Too close. The kind of closeness that makes you immediately aware of your own body and the space around it. I turned and found myself face to face with one of the Santas. He was tall, probably about 6'2" or 3". His suit was a darker red than the others, closer to burgundy. The beard looked real, gray and rough, and he had pale blue eyes that stared directly at me without blinking. He was offering me a candy cane wrapped in cellophane and said something like, "A special gift from the North Pole just for you." His voice was low, almost a whisper, which was strange because the other Santas I had seen used that loud, cheerful, exaggerated voice. I smiled politely and told him no, thank you, I was fine. He did not move. He stayed there, holding the candy cane about 6 inches from my face. I tried to move around him, but he shifted his body to block me. Not aggressively, not in a way anyone else would have noticed, but enough to force me to stop. He said I had to take it, that he had chosen it especially for me. I remember looking around to see if anyone else was watching, but everyone was busy with their shopping, their conversations. A family passed right beside us, and the father even greeted the Santa with a gesture, as if he were part of the entertainment. I told him again, more firmly this time, that I did not want the candy cane. Then something changed in his face just for a second. The smile remained, but his eyes went dead, as if someone had flipped a switch. He leaned toward me and said, "You're going to regret not taking it." Then he straightened up, let out a loud theatrical laugh, and disappeared into the crowd. My heart was pounding. I stood there for maybe a full minute trying to convince myself I had exaggerated, that he was just a weird guy taking his Santa role too seriously. I decided to shake it off and keep enjoying the festival. I bought a cup of hot spice cider and walked toward the gazebo, where a group of teenagers was singing Silent Night with surprisingly good harmony. The sun was starting to set and the temperature had dropped a few degrees, so I zipped my jacket all the way up and adjusted the scarf around my neck. For about 20 minutes, I managed to forget about that Santa. I watched the singers, clapped with everyone else, and even chatted with an older woman beside me about how talented the kids were. Then I saw him again. He was on the other side of the gazebo, maybe 30 feet away, looking directly at me. Not at the singers, not at the crowd, at me. He stood completely still, both hands resting on the handle of a large red sack that sat on the ground beside him. When our eyes met, he slowly raised one hand and waved. It was not a friendly wave. It was slow, deliberate, as if he wanted to make sure I knew he had found me again. I moved. I did not wave back, did not smile. I just turned and walked as fast as I could without running toward the other end of the festival. My mind was racing, trying to decide whether I was being paranoid or whether that man really was following me. There were hundreds of people there. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he had simply been assigned near the gazebo and recognized me. I stopped in front of a candle stall and pretended to look at the merchandise while checking behind me. He was not there. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The woman behind the counter asked if I needed help. I said no, that I was just looking. My voice came out shakier than I wanted. I bought a vanilla candle I didn't want just to have an excuse to stay longer and scan the crowd. No burgundy suit, no pale blue eyes. I looked at my phone and saw it was almost 5. The festival was supposed to last until 8, but I decided I had seen enough. I was going back to my car and going home. The walk to my car should have taken 5 minutes. The streets leading away from the main square were much quieter, with fewer lights and almost no people. Most visitors were still gathered around the stalls in the gazebo, enjoying the last hours of daylight. I passed a closed hardware store, a small church with a nativity scene in the yard, and a row of houses with their porch lights on. My car was parked on a side street called Birch Lane, under a large oak tree that had lost all its leaves. I could already see it from the corner, my silver Corolla waiting for me. I was about 50 feet away when I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy footsteps. Boots on pavement. At first, I did not turn around. I told myself it was just another person leaving the festival, heading to their own car. But the footsteps matched my pace exactly. When I slowed down, they did too. When I sped up, they sped up. My chest tightened and I felt a cold wave run through my whole body. I turned around. He was about 20 feet behind me, walking steadily in my direction. The burgundy Santa suit looked darker in the fading light, almost brown. His white beard caught the glow of a nearby porch light. He was no longer smiling. His face was completely empty, expressionless, and he was dragging that red sack with one hand. The sack was heavy. I noticed it from the way it scraped against the asphalt, from the tension in his arm. He stopped when I stopped. We stood there, looking at each other in the middle of that empty street. Then he spoke. His voice was calm, almost pleasant, as if commenting on the weather. "You forgot your gift." I did not answer. I couldn't. My legs felt full of cement. He took another step toward me, and that broke the spell that had kept me frozen. I turned and ran the last few feet to my car, clumsily searching for my keys, almost dropping them twice before I managed to unlock the door and throw myself inside. I slammed it shut and pressed the lock with so much force I thought I would break it. My fingers trembled as I tried to put the key in the ignition. Through the windshield, I saw him approach. He was not running. He did not need to. He knew I was trapped in that car, on that empty street, with no one nearby to help me. He walked up to the driver's window and stood there, looking down at me. Up close, I could notice details I had not seen before. His eyebrows were thick and unkempt. He had a small scar crossing his upper lip. His eyes had a kind of emptiness, as if he were looking at an object instead of a person. He lifted the red sack with both hands so I could see it clearly. Then he slammed it against my window. The impact produced a deep, heavy thud that shook the entire door. It was not the sound of fabric and candy canes. It was the sound of metal. Something solid and heavy was inside that sack. He swung it again, and this time I saw a dent form in the door panel. I screamed. I finally managed to put the key in the ignition and turn it, but my hand slipped from the steering wheel when he hit the window a third time. The glass did not break, but I could see a small crack forming in one corner. He was methodical. He swung the sack with a steady rhythm. Each impact was stronger than the last. I put the car in reverse and stepped on the accelerator without even looking back. The tires screeched and I almost hit a mailbox on the other side of the street. He staggered backward when the car shot away from him, and for 1 second I saw surprise on his face, as if he had not expected me to actually manage to escape. I shifted into drive and floored it, watching him shrink in the rearview mirror. He did not chase me. He only stood in the middle of Birch Lane, holding the sack at his side, watching my car disappear as I turned the corner. I drove straight to the police station without stopping, running 2 stop signs and probably a red light. I was crying so hard I could barely see the road. When I arrived, I almost fell getting out of the car and ran inside, trying to explain through sobs what had happened. The officer at reception looked at me as if I had lost my mind. "A Santa tried to attack you with a bag of candy canes," she repeated. I could hear how absurd it sounded. But then another officer, an older man with gray hair and a tired face, came out from the back. He had been listening. He asked me to describe the man again. His height, the color of the suit, anything I remembered about his face. I told him everything. The burgundy suit, the real beard, the pale blue eyes, the scar on his lip. When I mentioned the scar, the older officer exchanged a look with his partner that turned my stomach. He told me to sit down and wait, that they needed to check something. I sat in a plastic chair for almost an hour, wrapped in a blanket someone had given me, drinking water from a paper cup. Officers passed by, spoke in low voices, made calls. Finally, the older officer came back and sat across from me. He told me I was the 4th woman to report an incident with a man dressed as Santa at the Cedar Falls Festival that day. The 4th. One woman said a Santa had grabbed her by the arm near the parking area and tried to drag her toward a van before her husband intervened. Another said a Santa followed her to the portable restroom area and blocked the exit until she screamed for help. A teenager reported that a Santa had offered to take her home and became aggressive when she refused. They never caught him. That is the part that still keeps me awake at night. The festival did not have an official registration system for volunteer Santas. Anyone could show up in a suit, take a basket of candy canes from the welcome table, and blend into the crowd. The police checked the area where I had parked, but he was already gone. They found tire marks on the asphalt and a deep scratch on the driver's door of my Corolla, but no fingerprints, no witnesses, nothing useful. The older officer told me they suspected that man had been using festivals like that for years. He moved from town to town during the holiday season, using the costume and the chaos as cover to choose and approach women. He said they had similar reports in 2 other counties from several years back, but never enough evidence to identify a suspect. I moved away from that area a few months later. Not exactly because of the incident, but it didn't help. Now every December when I see a Santa at the mall or ringing a bell in front of a store, I look at his eyes first. I search for that emptiness. I search for that scar. I never knew who he was or what was really inside that sack, but I know what he planned to do. I know I was lucky. And I know that somewhere out there he is probably still doing it. Still walking through crowded festivals in that burgundy suit. Still choosing women who are alone. Still asking them if they want a gift from the North Pole. Story 6. Christmas Eve of 2017 was supposed to be my new beginning. After my divorce became final in September, I rented a 1-bedroom apartment in a quiet building on Crescent Avenue, one of those old brick complexes from the 60s, with thick walls and radiator heating. My daughter Zoe had turned 7 that fall and was spending the holidays with her mother and grandparents in Ohio. So I thought I would get through the night alone with takeout and a movie marathon. The building had 12 apartments spread across 3 floors. Most of my neighbors were older people who traveled south for the winter, or young professionals who went home to their families. By December 23rd, the parking lot was almost empty. I remember thinking it felt peaceful, that the silence would help me restart my life and maybe even enjoy my own company for once. My college friends kept texting me to come to their houses, but at 34, newly divorced, I needed to prove to myself that I could be alone. I spent most of that day unpacking the last boxes I had been avoiding since the move. Kitchen things mostly. Objects my ex-wife let me keep because, anyway, she had never liked them. Around 6 in the evening, I ordered Chinese food from the only restaurant still delivering and settled onto the sofa with beef lo mein and a Bruce Willis movie. The radiator knocked and hissed in that comforting way old buildings have. Outside, through the window, light snow began to fall over the parking lot. I had a single lamp on in the living room. The television cast blue shadows across the walls, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to okay. The food was mediocre, the movie predictable, but I was warm and safe in my own space, building a life that belonged only to me. That small comfort would not last long. The first time I heard the doorknob move, it was around 9:30. I muted the television and listened, thinking maybe some neighbor had gotten the wrong floor after drinking at some holiday gathering. The building had no elevator, only a central staircase, and the layout of each floor was identical. So it happened sometimes. I heard the knob turn left, then right, then a pause. The footsteps moved away, soft on the hallway carpet. I dismissed it and went back to the movie. 20 minutes later, it happened again. The same pattern. Turn left, turn right, silence. This time I stood and went to the door, pressing my ear against the cold metal. Nothing. I thought whoever it was must have understood their mistake by now and returned to their apartment. I took a beer from the refrigerator and told myself I was being paranoid, that the divorce had made me nervous, that spending Christmas alone was messing with my head. The building was safe. The neighborhood was safe. And drunk people make mistakes. By 11, the doorknob had sounded 4 more times. The intervals were getting shorter, maybe 15 minutes between each attempt. And the pattern never changed. Turn left, turn right, pause, footsteps moving away. I began keeping the television muted, sitting in the darkness with only the glow of the screen, waiting for the next attempt. Something about the repetition disturbed me in a way I did not know how to explain. A drunk person would have knocked, would have called someone, would have realized the mistake and felt embarrassed. This was methodical, patient, like someone testing a lock they intended to open. Around 11:15, I finally gathered the courage to look through the peephole. The hallway was lit by a single fluorescent tube that buzzed and flickered at the far end, staining everything a sickly yellow. Standing right in front of my door, maybe half a meter away, was a man I had never seen. He did not move, did not knock, did nothing. He was simply there, looking at my door, his head tilted slightly as if he were listening to something on the other side. I pulled away from the peephole so fast I almost tripped over my own feet. My heart pounded in my ears, and I had to press my palm against the wall to steady myself. The man looked about 40, with a gaunt face and sunken eyes that seemed to absorb the hallway light instead of reflecting it. He wore a dark green jacket, the kind that looks like it came from a military surplus store, and his hair was cut short and unevenly, as if he had done it himself. What unsettled me most was his posture. There was no impatience in it, no frustration, no sign that he was lost or confused. He stood like someone waiting for a bus he knew would arrive, relaxed and certain. I watched him through the peephole for what felt like 5 minutes, and he did not shift his weight from one leg to the other, did not check his phone, did not look down the hallway. He simply existed there, completely still, breathing in small clouds that fogged the air in front of his face. I moved away from the door as silently as possible and took my phone from the coffee table. My first impulse was to call the building manager, but I knew Victor had gone to visit his sister in Pennsylvania for the week. The security guard, an older man named Douglas, who usually sat at reception from 6 to midnight, had the night off for Christmas Eve. I remembered he had mentioned it when I picked up a package that week, joking that no one caused trouble during the holidays. I dialed 911 on the phone and hesitated, wondering whether I was exaggerating. The man had not threatened me. He had not broken anything. He had not even spoken. But I kept thinking about the doorknob, about those small patient turns 6 times now, and about the way he stood there, as if he had nowhere else to go. I pressed call. The operator answered after 3 rings. She was a tired-sounding woman, as if she had spent the whole night taking calls. I explained the situation in a whisper, feeling ridiculous, expecting her to tell me to calm down. Instead, she took my address and asked if I had any way to barricade the door. That question told me everything I needed to know about how seriously she was taking it. She told me they would send a patrol car, but because of the volume of calls on Christmas Eve, the nearest available officer was handling an incident on the other side of town. The estimated response time was more than an hour, possibly longer. She advised me to stay away from the door, keep the phone charged, and call immediately if the situation worsened. I thanked her and hung up. Then I stood in the middle of the living room feeling completely defenseless. 1 hour, 60 minutes waiting in the darkness, knowing that man was right outside my door. I dragged the sofa across the floor as quietly as possible and wedged it against the front entrance. Then I stacked 2 kitchen chairs on top to reinforce it. It looked absurd, like something a child would build to keep monsters away, but it made me feel a little better. I turned off every light in the apartment except the bathroom light, which had no windows, and sat on the floor with my back against the bathtub. From there, I could hear the front door clearly, and I would have time to react if anything happened. For about 20 minutes, there was nothing. No footsteps, no doorknob moving, no sound at all except the radiator and my own breathing. I began to wonder if he had left, if maybe everything had been a strange misunderstanding after all. Then I heard it, a soft tapping against glass coming from the bedroom. My apartment was on the 2nd floor, and the bedroom window faced the rear of the building, where a rusty fire escape zigzagged down to the alley. I had never used it. I had not even opened that window since moving in, but I knew it was there. The tapping repeated, 3 light knocks, evenly spaced, almost polite. I crawled out of the bathroom, keeping below the window line, and reached the bedroom entrance. The blinds were lowered but not completely closed. Through the slats, I could see a shadow moving on the fire escape. He had found another way. He was testing the window the same way he had tested the door. Methodical and patient, looking for any weakness he could use. I called 911 again, my voice breaking as I explained that the man had moved to the fire escape. The same operator answered, and I could hear concern in her tone despite her professional calm. She told me the unit was still on the way, maybe 45 minutes out, and asked if I had anything to defend myself with. I thought of my kitchen, of the drawer where I kept the cheap knives I had bought at a discount store, and realized I had left them on the other side of the apartment, past the bedroom window, where the shadow was still moving. The operator stayed on the line with me, speaking in a low, firm voice, asking questions about the building layout, other exits, and neighbors I could go to. I told her the truth, that the building was empty, that I was alone, that no one was coming to help me. The tapping stopped. For a moment I thought maybe he had given up, but then I heard his steps on the metal grating of the fire escape, slowly moving toward the living room side of the building. He was circling the apartment, checking every possible point of entry. My apartment had 4 windows in total. The living room window was larger than the bedroom one, a wide double-pane unit that faced the parking lot. I had never considered it a vulnerability, only a source of light and a decent view. Now I looked at it from across the room, watching the snow fall under the orange glow of the streetlight, waiting for his face to appear. The operator kept talking, but I had stopped answering. Every nerve in my body was focused on that rectangle of glass. When the tapping came, it was louder than before, more certain. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. I saw his silhouette rise from below and understood he had climbed from the fire escape onto the narrow ledge that ran along the outside of the building. He pressed his face against the glass, cupping his hands around his eyes to look inside. Although I was sitting in complete darkness, I knew he couldn't see me, but I could see him. His breath fogged the window in slow rhythmic pulses, and his eyes moved from one side of the living room to the other, searching for any sign of movement. He looked calm, almost bored, as if this were something he had done many times before. I don't know what made me stand up. Maybe fear transformed into something else. Maybe it was the realization that hiding was not going to save me. Or maybe I just wanted him to know that I was there too, watching him. I took the phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it directly at the window, directly at his face. For one horrible second, we made eye contact through the glass. His expression did not change. No surprise, no anger, nothing. He only looked at me the way one looks at a closed door, an obstacle that must be solved. Then he smiled, a small, quick movement of his lips, and raised one finger to point at the window latch. It was an old one, a simple crescent lock that moved up and down, and I had never checked whether it was properly secured. I threw myself across the room and slammed the latch with my palm just as he put his weight against the frame. The window shook but held. He tried again, harder, and I heard the wood groan in protest. The operator was shouting in my ear, asking what was happening, but I could not find the words to answer. I only held the latch with both hands and pushed back against every attempt he made, feeling the vibrations run up my arms each time he threw himself against the glass. Then headlights appeared. A car entered the parking lot below, its high beam sweeping across the side of the building. The man stopped pushing and looked down, his face illuminated for an instant in the white glare. I heard a car door open, then a voice, someone calling in Spanish to a child in the back seat. One of my neighbors was returning late from a family gathering, completely unaware of what was happening 2 floors above. The man on the window ledge looked at me one last time, with that same empty, evaluating stare. Then he disappeared. He climbed down to the fire escape and descended so quickly and silently that when I ran to the bedroom window, all I could see were footprints in the fresh snow, heading toward the back alley. The police arrived 37 minutes later. They searched the building, the alley, and the nearby blocks, but found nothing. There were no fingerprints on the windows, no identification, no witnesses except me. The officer who took my statement said it sounded like a professional, someone who targeted empty buildings during the holidays, looking for easy entry points. He asked if anything had been stolen, and I almost laughed. The man never got in. He took nothing from my apartment. But standing in my living room at 2 a.m. on Christmas Day, surrounded by furniture pushed against the door, I understood that he had taken something. I moved 3 weeks later and never spent another night in that building. Sometimes I still think about him, about that patient smile, about how close he came, and I wonder how many other doors he has tested since then, and how many eventually opened. Story 7. I had not seen most of my family in more than 10 years. My name is Laura, and I had stayed away for a reason. My childhood memories are a mixture of love and fear, and almost all of them revolve around my younger cousin, Zachary. Growing up, he was the closest thing I had to a brother. When my parents died, I cut contact with my relatives. It was simpler that way. But last December, I received an invitation to the family Christmas gathering. I felt a strange kind of pull, as if I had to go or something would remain unfinished forever. When I arrived at my aunt's house, it was like stepping into a time capsule. It smelled of cinnamon and pine. The lights shone on the tree. There was the old sofa where my aunt always sat, but something was not right. Everyone was kind, too kind. My cousins, with whom I used to fight and laugh, exchanged stiff courtesies. The conversations felt forced, that kind of artificial politeness that makes your skin crawl. But what caught my attention most was Zachary's absence. I had not seen him in years, and still I remembered him with painful clarity. His messy hair, his constant jokes, and yet no one mentioned him. It was as if he had never existed. During dinner, I quietly asked my cousin Hannah about Zachary, expecting a simple answer. She froze for a second before saying he was busy with work and could not come, but the hesitation in her voice did not fit. I tried asking others, and each time I received a different explanation. Uncle Bob claimed he was out of town. Aunt Marie said he was sick but gave no further details. When I asked my older cousin Mark, he looked away and muttered something about Zachary trying to get his life back together. The more they spoke, the more I felt I was losing control of the truth. After midnight, I was sitting alone, watching the fire flicker in the fireplace, when I heard voices coming from the kitchen. At first they were whispers, but the more I listened, the clearer they became. My aunt and uncle were arguing with Mark. They were talking about Zachary. They mentioned the previous Christmas, an argument that had escalated too far. That was when I learned that Zachary had disappeared that night, during a fight that turned physical. They buried him. The family buried him to protect someone. I could not believe what I was hearing. The truth was too twisted, too terrifying. When I moved closer, they realized I had heard. The room fell silent. My aunt's voice, low and sharp, was the first to break the stillness. She demanded that I join the pact. At first, I did not understand what she meant, but when she repeated it, her voice grew colder. No one could leave until I agreed to stay silent. I had to promise, forever, that I would not speak about Zachary or about what had happened. It was as if they were trying to trap me, to silence me permanently. The threat in their eyes was unmistakable. They were not asking me to keep a secret. They were warning me that if I did not, I might never leave that house alive. The room felt smaller as they began to close in around me. The chairs scraped softly across the floor, as if no one wanted to make a sound loud enough to break the fragile agreement holding them together. My aunt spoke calmly, almost gently, explaining that families survive by protecting themselves, that mistakes are buried for the greater good. She said Zachary had been unpredictable that night, that things had been said, that someone lost control. Every sentence sounded rehearsed, as if they had all practiced that explanation together. I noticed how carefully they avoided saying who had actually touched him. My chest tightened when I understood that every pause, every shared glance was part of the same unspoken script. They were not mourning him. They were protecting something. And now I was standing in the middle of it. I tried to say that I needed air, that the night had become too heavy, but my uncle silently turned the lock on the back door. No one raised their voice. That was what frightened me most. My cousin Mark positioned himself near the hallway, blocking the path toward the bedrooms. His jaw was clenched so tightly it looked painful. Someone poured more wine into my glass without asking, and the red liquid spilled over the rim. They kept talking about tradition, loyalty, about how silence had already saved them once. Every word felt like pressure building behind my eyes. It was clear that they did not believe this was cruelty. They saw it as maintenance. As the clock moved deeper and deeper into the night, they began explaining the rules of that supposed pact. Nothing in writing. Nothing said outside the house. No sudden confession born from guilt or rage. They reminded me that people disappear when stories are told the wrong way. One of them mentioned how easily accidents happen in winter, how isolated the house can feel when the roads are empty and phones lose signal. I understood that they were not pretending in order to scare me into obeying. They were offering me a place inside the lie, a seat at the table of denial. My mind kept returning to Zachary's laugh, to the way he used to drum his fingers on any surface. That sound felt impossibly far away now. In the end, exhaustion came like a thick, disorienting fog, and they used that moment to press me for an answer. My aunt took my hand. Her grip was firm despite her soft tone, and she asked me to promise to leave the past buried. I nodded slowly because arguing seemed useless and dangerous. The relief that moved through them was immediate and disturbing, like a storm passing too quickly. They unlocked the doors, poured themselves more drinks, and acted as if nothing strange had happened. Inside me, something broke silently. I understood then that surviving that night meant carrying Zachary alone, in a way none of them ever would. The morning light felt wrong when it finally slipped through the curtains. Pale and weak, as if it did not belong in that house. Everyone acted lighter, almost cheerful. They made coffee and placed pastries on the table, as if the previous night had been nothing more than an uncomfortable conversation that sleep could soften. No one mentioned Zachary again, not even by accident. I began noticing small details I had not registered before. A crack in the kitchen tile that looked as though it had been scrubbed too many times. A slight dent in the hallway wall at shoulder height. Framed photographs rearranged in a way that left a strangely symmetrical but empty space. Those changes were not new. They were careful. I left later that morning with hugs that lasted a second too long and smiles calculated with too much precision. No one followed me outside, but I felt watched until my car disappeared down the road. The cold air hit my face, and for the first time since I arrived, I could breathe properly. I drove until my hand stopped gripping the steering wheel. Then I pulled over just to sit there, listening to the engine make small clicking sounds as it cooled. Part of me wanted to go straight to the authorities, to say everything out loud before fear could convince me not to. Another part knew exactly what kind of people my relatives were when they felt cornered. They had already shown how far they were willing to go to protect one of their own. For weeks, I barely slept. Every unknown number on my phone made my pulse spike. I replayed their voices in my head, that calm certainty with which they spoke of silence and consequences. I did try to investigate Zachary on my own. I searched old records, reviewed archived posts, asked distant relatives who had not been there that night. Most answers ended abruptly. Conversations dried up as soon as his name came out. One person admitted they had been told Zachary had suddenly moved away and that they should not ask questions. That was when I understood how wide the lie was, how many people had accepted it without even knowing why. I have not gone back since, and I never will. I cut contact completely, changed my number, and moved far enough away for the distance to feel permanent. The truth is still heavy, still unresolved, but I chose the only kind of control I could take. I refused to be part of their pact beyond having survived it. Zachary exists in my memory, not in theirs, and I will not allow him to disappear completely just because it is more convenient for them. Writing this is the closest I will come to saying his name out loud. If something ever happens to me, I hope someone reads this and understands that some families are not broken by tragedy. They seal it, hide it, and wait for it to resurface. Story 8. That winter, our family decided to do something we had always talked about but had never actually done. Cut our own Christmas tree on public land. At that time, life felt stable in a quiet, almost boring way. The kind of routine where weekends blur into each other, and you start looking for excuses to manufacture memories. I worked long weeks. My wife, Emily, had just finished a difficult period at her job, and the children were restless from spending so much time indoors. The idea sounded simple and wholesome, the kind of thing people remember years later with a laugh. We loaded the car early in the morning, with the thermos knocking between the seats and the children arguing over the music while frost clung to the windows. Nothing about that drive hinted at how abruptly the day would change. It seemed like one of those harmless family plans you do not question too much. That feeling of safety stayed with us longer than it should have. The place we chose was an area the neighbors talked about casually, a point between maintained roads and deep forest, with no clear boundaries once you left the parking area. There were few signs, old posts leaning at odd angles, many half hidden by undergrowth. The snow had not yet covered everything, but the ground was slippery, and each step made a soft crunch that echoed more than expected. We walked deeper than planned, drawn by trees that looked fuller the farther we went. The children trailed behind, kicking frozen leaves, while Emily pointed out shapes in the branches. The forest felt empty in a strange way, not peaceful, just quiet enough to make you notice your own breathing. At one point, I remember thinking how easy it would be to become disoriented there. Even so, nothing screamed danger, only isolation. The first shot sounded like a firecracker buried underground, a dry crack followed by a thud when something drove into the ground a few feet from us. We all stopped at the same time, not from panic but from confusion, as if our brains needed a second to catch up with what had just happened. Then came a voice shouting words that bounced and warped between the trees, with no clear direction, impossible to locate. I could not tell whether it was one person or more than one, only that the voice carried anger. Emily grabbed the children and pulled them toward her without saying anything. We shouted back that we were leaving, that it must be a mistake. There was no response, only the sound of movement somewhere beyond the tree line. The forest suddenly felt closed in, as if it were tightening around us. Going back was not as simple as retracing our steps, not with the slope we had descended without realizing it. Another shot tore through the air, this time closer. It struck the ground with enough force to throw fragments of frozen dirt against my leg. The pain appeared sharp and hot, more from the fall that came after than from the impact itself. The children began to cry. Not scream, but that silent crying of fear that makes everything worse. We moved downhill quickly, sliding more than walking, branches striking our coats. The phone signal appeared and disappeared uselessly, a single bar showing up and vanishing as if mocking us. I kept thinking that whoever was shooting believed something about us that was not true, that in their mind we were not a family at all. In that moment, the only thing that mattered was getting back to the road, wherever it was. The sounds followed us in bursts, not constantly, and that made it worse. Each shot between the trees restarted the fear, forcing us to guess whether it was closer or whether the echo only made it seem different. Emily stayed behind me, pushing the children forward. Her voice was low and steady, though her face had gone pale. My leg protested with every step. The terrain dropped unevenly, with roots hidden under leaves ready to trip us. At one point, we crouched behind a cluster of thick pines, staying still long enough to hear our own breathing. I shouted again that we were lost and that we were leaving. My voice broke halfway through the sentence. The answer was another shot, closer than before, tearing bark from a tree to our left. Whoever it was did not want to talk. The terrain forced us into a narrow channel formed by runoff water, slick with mud and ice. My foot slipped and I fell hard, pain spreading through my side and stealing my breath. Emily did not hesitate. She handed me one of the children and lifted me with a strength I did not know she had. The children asked questions in whispers, the kind that break your heart because you have no answers. I focused on small things just to keep moving. The sound of boots on wet leaves, the smell of pine sap crushed underfoot, the way the light changed when clouds passed over us. Every noise seemed amplified, as if the forest were listening. The idea that someone was tracking us, convinced we were stealing or hunting, settled heavily in my mind. It did not matter what was true, only what that person believed mattered. Finally, we saw the road between the trees, a thin gray line that seemed unreal after so much green and brown. Relief came too soon, so intense it hurt my chest. Another shot sounded and struck the ground behind us. So close I felt it through my feet. We ran the final stretch without thinking, cutting through the brush and falling onto the edge of the road as if we had been thrown there. Cars passed without slowing down, their drivers unaware of what had just happened a few feet behind the trees. I waved one down, shouting with a hoarse-torn voice. When someone finally stopped, the words came out in pieces, barely understandable even to me. I kept looking toward the tree line, half expecting someone to appear. The authorities searched the area later, asking questions that felt small compared to what we had lived through. They found no shell casings. There were no witnesses. There were no clear property markers explaining whether we had crossed any boundary. They told us it was probably a local hunter, someone protective of the land or the game, but nothing could be proven. We returned home shaken, scraped, and exhausted. The tree was completely forgotten. The children did not talk much that night, and neither did we. Even now, the memory does not stay with me as a clear image, but as a feeling that returns every time I think about how thin the line is between a normal day and something completely different. We entered those woods expecting a story to tell at Christmas. We left understanding how easily people can become targets without even knowing why. That night, after the children finally fell asleep, Emily and I sat at the kitchen table without turning on the ceiling light. My leg was so swollen that every movement in the chair sent a dull pain up to my hip. But neither of us wanted to talk about hospitals or reports again. The house felt too quiet, the kind of silence that makes you replay sounds in your head. I kept hearing the crack of the shots, separated just enough to feel deliberate, not wild, not impulsive, calculated. What disturbed me most was the intention behind them, the idea that someone chose to frighten us instead of helping us. We were not chased by an accident. We were chased by a belief. During the following days, small details from that afternoon kept surfacing without warning. The way the shouts did not sound hurried, how the shots always landed close enough to send a message, but not close enough to finish it. I realized whoever it was knew that land well, knew how sound traveled there, knew how difficult it would be to escape downhill. That thought stayed with me more than the injury. It meant it was not chaos, it was control. I tried explaining it to a friend afterward and could not find the right words. It is difficult to describe how terrifying it is to be treated as a threat when you are only trying to leave. We never returned to that area, not even to look for the tire tracks we had left in the snow. Once, the children asked if we could try cutting a tree somewhere else. My answer came too quickly, too harshly. Even places that seem open and harmless can belong to someone in ways you cannot see. Public land is not always as clear as a map makes it seem. After that, I began paying attention to boundaries. Not just fences or signs, but those invisible limits people impose through fear. Every wooded area I see now feels different, heavier. I no longer assume that silence means safety. What still unsettles me is that we will never know who fired or how close we came to something worse. That person returned to their life convinced they had protected something, while we carried the memory home. Nothing followed us after that day. No threats, no calls, no explanations. It simply ended. And maybe that is why it remains. There was no clear lesson at the end, no justice to point to. Only a normal family outing that ended with the silent understanding that being in the wrong place at the wrong time can turn strangers into enemies without a single word being exchanged. Story 9. At that stage of my life, nights were quiet and predictable, the kind where errands feel automatic and nothing breaks the routine. Work forced me to stay late more often than I wanted, and buying groceries became the last stop before returning home. The store sat under harsh white lights, almost empty, with that echo you only notice after midnight. I remember thinking everyone looked tired, as if the day had wrung us all out in the same way. Outside, the air felt cold and clean, carrying the smell of wet pavement and old leaves. My apartment was only a few blocks away, a straight walk through streets I knew well. Nothing about that night seemed special enough to remember, at least not at first. Near the entrance, a man was standing just beyond the automatic doors, dressed from head to toe as Santa Claus. The coat looked thick and worn. The red had faded until it seemed more like rust than Christmas, and the white trim was gray. He held a plastic donation bucket with a bell attached to the handle. He shook it slowly instead of ringing it. The beard sat crooked on his face, revealing a mouth that moved too much when he spoke. When he asked for a donation, his voice came out flat, almost bored. I politely declined and kept walking, already searching for my keys. Behind me, his tone changed. He began making comments about how people forgot the true meaning of Christmas. They were not loud, just sharp enough to reach me. The farther I walked, the more his words followed me, carried by the silent street. He spoke of greed and how people like me ruined things for everyone else. Every sentence ended with a forced laugh that echoed longer than it should have. I looked back once and saw him still there. The Santa coat swayed as he moved. He was not hurrying or falling behind. He only kept the same distance, the donation bucket swinging at his side. The street lights crossed the white trim of the suit, making it look dirty and uneven. Cars passed occasionally, but none slowed down. His steps stayed steady, patient, as if he had nowhere else to go. When my building came into view, my breathing felt short and fast. The lobby door required an electronic key, and the small glass entrance suddenly seemed fragile. I went in and let the door close behind me. The click of the lock sounded louder than usual. Through the glass, he stopped just outside, looking in as if studying a storefront. His voice passed through the door, accusing, disappointed, telling me I had learned nothing. The bucket struck the glass once when he moved closer. He grabbed the handle and pulled with enough force to make the frame vibrate. That was when the fear stopped feeling abstract and became heavy, real. I backed toward the elevators, my gaze fixed on the door as if it were suddenly going to give way. The lobby lights buzzed above me, casting reflections on the tile floor that made everything seem unreal. He pressed his face against the glass, the fake beard brushing it, and raised the bucket again. This time he shook it, not with rhythm, just enough to make the loose coins jingle. He said people needed consequences in order to understand generosity. The way he spoke sounded rehearsed, like phrases practiced alone. When the door did not open, his expression hardened into something tense and focused. He pulled the handle again, harder, and the metal briefly shrieked. I fumbled for my phone and called the police, keeping my voice low even though he was still talking. While I waited for the operator, he stepped back and began pacing the sidewalk in short lines, never moving away from the door. He pointed at the building, then at me, still visible through the glass. His words shifted from scolding to correction, like a teacher losing patience. He said Christmas was about learning, and that lessons were not meant to be comfortable. Every sentence seemed directed straight at me, personal and deliberate. The Santa hat slid to one side as he moved, revealing short, dark hair underneath. That detail stayed with me more than it should have. After a few minutes, headlights crossed the street, and the sound of an engine slowed nearby. The man stopped walking and looked toward the road. Then he looked back at me. His mouth tightened, and he leaned toward the glass one last time. He gently tapped the bucket against the door, almost delicately, as if making a point clear. Then he turned and left, disappearing between parked cars without looking back. By the time the patrol car arrived, the sidewalk was empty. The officers checked the area, took my statement, and nodded as if this was not the first strange thing they had heard that season. I barely slept that night. I jumped at every sound in the hallway. The next morning, I found a small mark on the lobby glass where his beard had brushed against it. A faint white line I could not stop looking at. Management later said they would review the cameras, but nothing came of it. I never saw the man again, not in a Santa suit or in any other form. Even so, every December, when donation bells start ringing in front of stores, my chest tightens. Now I take different routes home, even in neighborhoods I know. The lesson he believed he was teaching never arrived the way he wanted, but it stayed with me longer than I like to admit. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself it had been an isolated incident, just someone unstable using a costume as cover. I went back to work, clung to my routines, and told my friends a softened version that sounded less frightening when said out loud. Still, the small details refused to disappear. The scrape marks near the lobby handle had not been there before. A neighbor mentioned hearing someone shaking the door late that night, but assumed it was drunk college students. Management finally sent an email reminding residents not to let strangers into the building. Reading it felt surreal, like proof that it had really happened. A week later, while shopping earlier in the afternoon, I saw another Santa collecting donations in front of another store. This one looked cleaner, kinder, surrounded by families and children tugging on their parents' coats. Even so, my body reacted before my mind. I took a wide detour to avoid him, my heart racing and my eyes searching for that same worn coat and dull white trim. Nothing happened, and I felt embarrassed by how shaken I was. That night, however, I checked the lobby door twice before going upstairs. I began paying attention to reflections in windows, to footsteps behind me, to the rhythm of bells in the distance. Over time, I asked building management to let me move to an apartment on a higher floor, closer to the stairwell cameras. They did not ask many questions. They simply processed the request. A few weeks later, they installed new security measures, better exterior lighting, reinforced glass, clearer signage. Life slowly returned to something like normal. I stopped expecting to see red fabric on every corner. The fear faded, transforming into something quieter, like background noise I could ignore most days. Even now, years later, I still think about the calm way he walked, about how certain he seemed that he was right. There were never any further consequences. No arrest, no follow-up, no explanation. Maybe he moved on to someone else, or maybe he disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared. I do not know. What I do know is that I trust my instincts more than I used to, and I no longer dismiss the small moments. That night ended without physical harm, without headlines, and without answers, but it changed the way I move through the world. And every December, when I pass a donation bucket, I remember how close a normal night came to becoming something much worse.